Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let's begin. The late afternoon sun filtered through the bay windows of the small colonial house on Maple Street, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor that Natalie Carter had just finished polishing. She stood back, admiring her work with a satisfied sigh. After 3 years of saving every paycheck from her teaching job, she had finally bought this place. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even in the nicest part of town. But it was hers. The mortgage papers sat on the kitchen counter, still smelling faintly of fresh ink. Her name, Natalie Marie Carter, printed in bold letters next to the property address. She ran her fingers over the words, a smile tugging at her lips. This was real. This was home. Outside, a moving truck rumbled past, its engine growling as it turned the corner. Natalie barely noticed. She was too busy imagining where to hang the vintage mirror she'd found at the flea market last weekend, maybe above the fireplace, or in the hallway. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from her best friend, Maya. "Pizza tonight to celebrate your new place?" Natalie grinned, typing back quickly. "You bring the wine. I'll order the pizza. 7 p.m. Before Maya could reply, the front door swung open with a forceful creak. Natalie's head snapped up, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a set of keys in the other, keys that he was currently dangling in front of him as if he owned the place. He froze when he saw her. Natalie froze too. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then recognition slammed into her like a freight train. No. 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 This couldn't be happening. Natalie. His voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher around the edges, but unmistakably his. Ethan Mercer, her ex-boyfriend, the man she hadn't seen or spoken to in 10 years, the man who had shattered her heart into a million pieces and left her standing alone on a rainy street corner with nothing but broken promises. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" Natalie's voice came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't care. Ethan blinked, his brows furrowing. "Your house? This is my house. I just bought it this morning." "You what?" Natalie's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I bought this house 3 days ago. I have the papers right there on the counter. So, unless you're here to rob me, I suggest you turn around and leave." Ethan's jaw tightened. He glanced at the counter, then back at her. "There's been a mistake." "Damn right there's been a mistake," Natalie shot back, her voice rising. "Yours, for walking into my house like you own the place." "I do own the place," Ethan said, his tone annoyingly calm. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like a digital contract. "I signed the papers this morning. The real estate agent assured me everything was finalized." Natalie's pulse pounded in her ears. This had to be some kind of nightmare. She marched over to the counter, grabbed her mortgage documents, and shoved them in his face. "See this? My name, my signature, my house." Ethan studied the papers, his expression unreadable. Then he held up his phone, showing her a nearly identical contract. Same address, different name. "Someone made a mistake," he said quietly. "A big one." Natalie wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Fine. Then you need to call your agent and fix it, because I'm not leaving." "Neither am I," Ethan said, his voice firm. "Until this gets sorted out, I'm staying right here." "Like hell you are." Natalie crossed her arms, blocking the hallway. You lost the right to stay anywhere near me 10 years ago." Ethan's expression flickered, something almost like regret passing through his eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that cold, businesslike mask she remembered all too well. "This isn't personal, Natalie. It's legal. If there's been an error, we need to figure it out. Running me off the property won't solve anything. Neither will you standing there acting like some corporate robot," Natalie snapped. "God, you haven't changed at all, have you? Still, Mr. Ice King, no emotions, no apologies, just contracts and logic." "And you're still stubborn as hell," Ethan shot back, his voice hardening. "Some things never change." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and bitter. Natalie's chest tightened. She wanted to throw him out. She wanted to slam the door in his face and pretend this wasn't happening. But deep down, she knew he was right. If there had been some kind of mix-up with the sale, they needed to fix it legally, even if it meant being stuck in the same room with the man who had once promised her forever and then disappeared without a trace. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "We'll call the agents, both of them, and whoever screwed this up is going to pay." Ethan nodded, his jaw still tight. "Agreed." Natalie turned away, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. Her real estate agent, Mr. Collins, answered on the third ring. "Natalie, how's the new place?" "There's a problem," Natalie said, her voice clipped. "A man just walked in claiming he bought the same house. How is that even possible?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. I'll need to check the records. Can you give me an hour?" "You have 30 minutes, Natalie said, then hung up. Behind her, Ethan was on his own call, his voice low and controlled. "I don't care what it takes, David. Fix this. Now." When he hung up, the silence in the room was suffocating. Natalie busied herself by straightening the cushions on the couch, anything to avoid looking at him. But she could feel his gaze on her, heavy and unrelenting. "You look different," Ethan said quietly. Natalie stiffened. Don't what?" "Don't try to make small talk. We're not friends. We're not anything." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You cut your hair." Natalie's hand instinctively went to the shoulder-length waves she'd chopped off 2 years ago after a particularly bad breakup. Not that he had any right to know that. "And you're still wearing expensive suits to intimidate people," she shot back. "Some habits die hard. It's not about intimidation," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "It's about professionalism." "Right. Because everything's always about business with you." Natalie finally turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "Even when you were breaking my heart, you made it sound like a business transaction. It's not working out, Natalie. We want different things, balls. Like I was some failed merger you could just write off." Ethan's expression darkened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Natalie laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about fair? You left me standing in the rain, Ethan. You said you needed space, and then you vanished. No calls, no texts, nothing. For 10 years, I thought I meant something to you. Turns out, I was just another item on your to-do list." "It wasn't like that," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Then what was it like?" Natalie demanded, her voice breaking. "Because from where I was standing, it felt like you didn't care at all." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Whatever he'd been about to say died on his lips. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and old wounds. Before either of them could say anything else, Natalie's phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Collins. "There's been an administrative error. We need to meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to sort this out." Natalie showed the message to Ethan. He nodded, his jaw tight. "My agent said the same thing." "Great," Natalie muttered. So we're stuck here together until tomorrow. Looks like it, Ethan said. Natalie groaned, pressing her hands to her face. This is a nightmare. For both of us, Ethan said quietly. She glared at him. Oh, I'm sure this is so hard for you, Mr. Billionaire CEO. Having to slum it in a house that's not a penthouse must be torture. Ethan's eyes flashed with something she couldn't quite read. Anger? Hurt? You don't know anything about my life, Natalie. And whose fault is that? She shot back. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, staring out the window at the quiet street beyond. Natalie watched him, her chest aching with a confusing mix of anger, hurt, and something she refused to name. This was going to be a long night. The tension in the small living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Natalie paced back and forth across the hardwood floor, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Every few seconds, she shot a glare in Ethan's direction. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his posture rigid and controlled. The silence was unbearable. I can't believe this is happening, Natalie muttered, more to herself than to him. Of all the houses in this city, you had to buy mine. I didn't know it was yours, Ethan said, without turning around. If I had, I would have picked a different property. Oh, so now I'm a property you'd avoid? Natalie snapped. That's not what I meant. Ethan finally turned to face her, his gray eyes sharp and unreadable. Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything, Natalie shot back. I'm just stating facts. You walked into my house, claimed it was yours, and now we're stuck here together because of some clerical nightmare. Forgive me if I'm not thrilled about it. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think I'm thrilled? This is the last place I want to be. Then leave, Natalie said, her voice rising. The door's right there. I can't, Ethan said, his tone clipped. Not until this gets resolved. And neither can you. Natalie wanted to scream. Instead, she turned away, grabbing her phone and scrolling through her contacts. Maybe she could call Maya, ask to crash at her place for the night. But no, that would feel like running away. And she'd worked too hard for this house to let Ethan Mercer chase her out of it. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. Then we'll just have to coexist, but don't expect me to be pleasant about it. Wouldn't dream of it, Ethan muttered. Natalie's head snapped toward him. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Nothing. Forget it. No, say it! Natalie pressed, stepping closer. If you've got something to say, just say it. Ethan met her gaze, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she used to know. The one who used to laugh at her terrible jokes, who used to hold her hand during thunderstorms, because he knew she hated the sound of thunder. But that man was gone, buried under layers of expensive suits and cold professionalism. You always did have a temper, Ethan said quietly. Natalie's breath hitched. And you always did know how to avoid answering a direct question. Ethan's lips twitched, almost like he wanted to smile. But he didn't. Instead, he turned back to the window, his shoulders tense. This is going to be a long night. Tell me about it, Natalie muttered. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was barely 6 p.m. The meeting with the agents wasn't until 9 tomorrow morning. That meant at least 15 hours stuck in this house with Ethan. 15 hours of awkward silence, bitter memories, and unspoken words. She needed a distraction. I'm ordering pizza, Natalie announced, grabbing her phone. You can fend for yourself. Fine, Ethan said. But when the pizza arrived 40 minutes later, Natalie found herself ordering extra, almost on autopilot. She told herself it was because she didn't want leftovers going to waste. not because she remembered that Ethan's favorite was pepperoni with extra cheese. When the delivery guy left, Natalie set the boxes on the kitchen counter. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over the back of a chair. He looked tired, more tired than she'd ever seen him. "I ordered extra," Natalie said, not looking at him. "Help yourself." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks." They ate in silence, standing on opposite sides of the kitchen island. Natalie picked at her slice, her appetite gone. Every time she glanced up, she caught Ethan watching her, his expression unreadable. "What?" she finally snapped. Ethan blinked, as if surprised she'd caught him staring. "Nothing. I didn't expect to see you again." "Yeah, well, life's full of surprises," Natalie said bitterly. "Most of them unpleasant." Ethan set down his slice, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Natalie, don't," Natalie interrupted, her voice sharp. "Whatever you're about to say, just don't. I don't want your apologies or your excuses. I just want this nightmare to be over." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he grabbed another slice of pizza and retreated to the living room. Natalie let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. Why did he have to look at her like that? Like he actually cared? Like the past 10 years hadn't happened? She hated it. She hated him. Or at least she wanted to. But the truth was, seeing him again stirred up feelings she'd thought she'd buried long ago. Feelings she didn't want to deal with. After they finished eating, the awkwardness only intensified. Natalie busied herself by unpacking a box of books, arranging them on the shelves in the living room. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his expression tense. "You can take the guest room upstairs," Natalie said without looking at him. "I'll sleep down here." "You don't have to do that," Ethan said. "I can take the couch." "I'm not arguing about this," Natalie said firmly. "Just take the room." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Thanks." As he headed upstairs, Natalie let out a long exhale. She grabbed a blanket from the closet and curled up on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboards above her reminded her that Ethan was here, just a few feet away. The man who had once been her everything, now a stranger in her home. Around midnight, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled, his shirt untucked. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "No," Natalie admitted. "You?" Ethan shook his head. "Too much on my mind." They stood there in the darkness, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. Natalie's chest tightened. She wanted to ask him why. Why he'd left. Why he'd never called. Why, after all these years, he'd walked back into her life like this. But the words stuck in her throat. "Good night, Natalie," Ethan said softly, turning back toward the stairs. "Good night," Natalie whispered. But even after he was gone, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Morning came too quickly. Natalie woke to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. For a blissful moment, she forgot where she was and why. Then reality crashed back in. Ethan. The house. The mess. She groaned, burying her face in the pillow. Why couldn't this all just be a bad dream? Dragging herself off the couch, she padded into the kitchen, still wearing the oversized t-shirt and sweatpants she'd thrown on last night. Ethan stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He'd changed into a fresh shirt. This one, a crisp white button-down that made him look annoyingly put together. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Morning," Natalie mumbled, running a hand through her messy hair. Ethan slid one of the mugs toward her. "Black, right? No sugar?" Natalie froze, her hand halfway to the mug. He remembered. After 10 years, he still remembered how she took her coffee. Something twisted in her chest, but she forced it down. "Yeah, thanks." They stood in awkward silence, sipping their coffee. Natalie could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them, heavy and suffocating. "The meeting's at 9, Ethan said, breaking the silence. "We should leave by 8:30 to be safe." Natalie nodded. "I'll be ready." She grabbed her mug and headed upstairs to shower and change. By the time she came back down, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, Ethan was already waiting by the door, his briefcase in hand. They drove to the real estate office in separate cars. Natalie didn't trust herself to be stuck in a confined space with him for that long. The tension was already unbearable. The office was small and cramped, with faded beige walls and a receptionist who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Collins, Natalie's agent, was already there, looking pale and nervous. Ethan's agent, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s named David, arrived a few minutes later. "Let's get started," David said, pulling out a thick folder of documents. What followed was 2 hours of legal jargon, conflicting contracts, and a whole lot of finger-pointing. Apparently, there had been a clerical error. The house had been listed under 2 different property codes, and both sales had gone through simultaneously. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, and no one seemed to know how to fix it. "So what does this mean?" Natalie asked, her patience wearing thin. "It means," Mr. Collins said, wringing his hands, "that technically both of you have valid claims to the property." Natalie's jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," Mr. Collins said miserably. "This is going to take time to sort out. Weeks, maybe months. Until then, the property is in legal limbo." "So what are we supposed to do?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "Live there together?" David cleared his throat. "That's one option. The other is for one of you to agree to vacate the property and wait for the legal process to resolve itself. We could offer compensation for the inconvenience, of course." "I'm not leaving," Natalie said immediately. "It's my house." "It's my house too," Ethan said, his tone just as firm. Natalie glared at him. "You've got a dozen properties, Ethan. You don't need this one." "That's not the point," Ethan shot back. "I bought it. I paid for it. I'm not walking away just because it's inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" Natalie's voice rose. "You think this is about inconvenience? This is my home, the first place I've ever owned. I'm not giving it up." The room fell silent. Mr. Collins looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. David cleared his throat again. "Perhaps you two could share the property temporarily, just until the legal issues are resolved." Natalie and Ethan both turned to stare at him. "You're joking," Natalie said flatly. David shrugged. "It's not ideal, but it's a solution. The house has multiple bedrooms. You could establish boundaries, split the space." "No," Natalie said immediately. "Absolutely not." "I agree," Ethan said. "That's a terrible idea." But as they left the office an hour later, it was clear that neither of them had a better option. Natalie stood on the sidewalk, staring at her car keys, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to rent another place while this got sorted out. Her savings were already stretched thin from the down payment. And knowing Ethan, he wasn't going to back down either. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. "I'll stay out of your way," Ethan said quietly, appearing beside her. "If we have to do this, I'll keep to my space. You won't even know I'm there." Natalie turned to look at him, her eyes narrowing. "You really think we can live under the same roof and pretend the past doesn't exist?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I don't see another option." Natalie exhaled sharply. "Fine, but we're setting ground rules." "Agreed," Ethan said. Back at the house, they sat at the kitchen table with a notepad between them. "Rule 1, Natalie said, scribbling furiously. "No entering each other's rooms without permission. Fair, Ethan said. Rule 2. We split all household expenses 50-50. Agreed. Rule 3. Natalie paused, her pen hovering over the paper. No talking about the past. What happened between us stays in the past. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. Natalie added it to the list, her chest tightening. She told herself it was for the best. Digging up old wounds wouldn't help anyone. But as she looked at Ethan, sitting across from her with that unreadable expression, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't as buried as she wanted it to be. Over the next few days, they settled into an uneasy routine. Ethan took the guest room upstairs. Natalie claimed the master bedroom. They cooked separately, ate at different times, and avoided each other as much as possible. But the house was small, and it was impossible not to cross paths. One evening, Natalie came home from work to find Ethan in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, making her stomach growl. "What are you making?" she asked, despite herself. "Pasta," Ethan said, not looking up. "There's extra if you want some." Natalie hesitated. She'd planned to order takeout, but the pasta smelled incredible. "I guess I could try it," she said, trying to sound indifferent. Ethan plated 2 servings and set one in front of her. They ate in silence, the only sound the clinking of forks against plates. "This is really good," Natalie admitted reluctantly. "Thanks," Ethan said. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at his lips. Natalie's heart did a traitorous little flip. She looked away quickly, focusing on her plate. This was dangerous. She couldn't let herself forget why she'd been so angry with him in the first place. But as the days turned into a week, the walls between them started to crack. Little by little, moment by moment, the ice began to thaw. And Natalie wasn't sure if that was a good thing or the worst thing that could possibly happen. Living with Ethan was like walking through a minefield. Every morning, Natalie woke up determined to keep her distance. Every evening, she found herself slipping, just a little. It started with small things. A polite, "good morning," when they passed each other in the hallway. A shared pot of coffee instead of brewing separate batches. A brief conversation about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Nothing meaningful, nothing personal. Just the bare minimum required for 2 people sharing a space. But Natalie could feel the shift. The anger that had fueled her for so long was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But it was joined by something else now. Curiosity, confusion, and, God help her, a flicker of something that felt dangerously close to longing. One Saturday morning, Natalie woke to the sound of hammering. She stumbled downstairs, still groggy, to find Ethan in the backyard, fixing the broken fence. He'd rolled up his sleeves, his hair slightly mussed, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "What are you doing?" Natalie asked, stepping outside. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "The fence was falling apart. I figured I'd fix it." "You don't have to do that," Natalie said, crossing her arms. "I was planning to hire someone." "Well, now you don't have to," Ethan said, turning back to his work. Natalie watched him for a moment, torn between irritation and something softer. She hated that he was being helpful. It made it harder to stay angry. "Fine," she said, "but I'm making lunch. Consider it payment." Ethan paused, then nodded. "Deal." An hour later, they sat on the back porch, eating sandwiches and drinking lemonade. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle. It almost felt normal. "You're better at this than I thought you'd be," Natalie said, gesturing to the fence. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Did you think I'd be useless?" "Kind of," Natalie admitted with a small smile. "You always seemed more comfortable behind a desk than with a hammer." Ethan chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I wasn't always a CEO, you know. I used to work construction during summers in college. Natalie blinked. I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know about me, Ethan said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Natalie looked away, her chest tightening. Maybe that's for the best, she said softly. Ethan didn't respond. But when Natalie glanced back at him, she saw something in his eyes. Something that looked a lot like regret. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing. She kept thinking about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at her on the porch, about the things he'd said and the things he hadn't. Around midnight, she gave up and headed downstairs for a glass of water. She found Ethan in the living room, sitting on the couch with his laptop. "Can't sleep?" he asked, looking up. "No," Natalie admitted. "You?" Ethan shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Natalie sat down on the opposite end of the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "What are you working on?" "Nothing important," Ethan said, closing the laptop. "Just some emails." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ethan said, "Natalie, can I ask you something?" Natalie's pulse quickened. "What?" "Do you ever think about us? About what we had?" Natalie's breath caught. She wanted to say no, to lie and tell him she'd moved on, that the past didn't matter anymore. But the truth was, she thought about it all the time. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Me too." Natalie's heart pounded. "Why did you leave, Ethan? Really?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I was scared." "Scared of what?" Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of failing you," Ethan said, his voice rough. "I was just starting my career. I had nothing to offer you. I thought you deserved better." Natalie stared at him, her chest aching. "That wasn't your decision to make." "I know," Ethan said, his jaw tight. "I know that now. But back then, I thought I was doing the right thing." Natalie blinked back tears. "You broke my heart, Ethan." "I know," Ethan said, his voice breaking, "and I've regretted it every day since." The room fell silent. Natalie wiped at her eyes, her heart a tangled mess of anger and pain, and something she didn't want to name. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to," Ethan said quietly. "I just wanted you to know the truth." Natalie nodded, unable to speak. She stood up, her legs shaky, and headed back upstairs. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop replaying his words. "I've regretted it every day since." Did that change anything? Could it? The next morning, the tension between them was palpable. Natalie avoided Ethan as much as possible, throwing herself into work. But by the end of the week, something shifted again. It happened one evening when Natalie came home late, exhausted and drenched from an unexpected rainstorm. She stumbled through the door, shivering, her clothes clinging to her skin. Ethan appeared in the hallway, his eyes widening. "God, Natalie, you're soaked." "I'm fine," Natalie said through chattering teeth. "Just need to change." But before she could move, Ethan draped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to the couch. "Sit," he said firmly. "I'll make tea." Natalie wanted to argue, but she was too cold and tired. She sank into the couch, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. A few minutes later, Ethan returned with a steaming mug of tea. He handed it to her, then sat down beside her. "You should have called," he said. "I would have picked you up." "I didn't want to bother you," Natalie said, taking a sip of tea. Ethan frowned. "You're not a bother, Natalie." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the concern in his gray eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan nodded. Anytime. They sat there in comfortable silence, the warmth of the tea and the blanket slowly thawing Natalie's frozen limbs. And for the first time in 10 years, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth saving between them. The days began to blur together. Natalie found herself falling into a rhythm with Ethan that felt both unsettling and strangely comforting. They cooked meals together, shared the TV in the evenings, and even started leaving little notes for each other on the fridge. Picked up milk. Thanks. Also, you left your jacket in the living room. It was domestic. Too domestic. And it scared Natalie more than she wanted to admit. One evening, Natalie came home to find Ethan in the kitchen, surrounded by ingredients. Flour dusted his shirt, and there was a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. "What are you doing?" Natalie asked, trying not to laugh. "Baking," Ethan said, not looking up from the recipe on his phone. Or at least, attempting to. "You? Baking?" Natalie couldn't hide her amusement. "I didn't think you knew how to turn on an oven." "I don't," Ethan admitted with a sheepish grin, "but I'm trying." Natalie walked over, peering at the mess on the counter. "What are you making?" "Brownies," Ethan said. "Or what's supposed to be brownies. I'm not sure they're turning out right." Natalie laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "You're supposed to mix the wet and dry ingredients separately first." Ethan blinked. "Oh, here," Natalie said, rolling up her sleeves. "Let me help before you burn the house down." Together, they salvaged the brownie batter, laughing at Ethan's culinary incompetence. By the time the brownies were in the oven, they were both covered in flour and chocolate. "This is a disaster," Ethan said, looking around at the mess. "A delicious disaster," Natalie corrected, licking chocolate off her finger. Ethan watched her, his expression softening. "I missed this." Natalie froze. "Missed what?" "This," Ethan said, gesturing between them. "You. Us. Just being together." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. She looked away, her chest tightening. "Ethan, don't." "Why not?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. "Because it's not fair," Natalie said, her voice breaking. "You can't just walk back into my life and act like everything's okay." "I'm not," Ethan said quietly. "I know it's not okay, but I want it to be." Natalie shook her head, tears prickling her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this." Ethan reached out, gently wiping a smudge of flour from her cheek. "Then don't. Just let me be here. Let me show you that I've changed." Natalie's breath hitched. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to so badly. But the fear of getting hurt again held her back. "I need time," she said finally. Ethan nodded. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." That night, as Natalie lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen. About the way he'd touched her cheek so gently, like she was something precious. She was falling for him again, and it terrified her. The next few days passed in a haze of stolen glances and unspoken words. Ethan kept his promise, giving Natalie space while still being there whenever she needed him. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom. He made her coffee every morning. He even left little notes that made her smile despite herself. "You're doing great. E. Don't forget to eat lunch. E. The brownies turned out okay. Thanks for the help. E." Natalie found herself softening, little by little. The walls she'd built around her heart were starting to crumble. One evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the air warm and still. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said, breaking the silence. "Anything," Ethan said. "Do you regret buying this house?" Natalie asked. If you'd known I was here, would you still have done it? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." Natalie blinked. "Really?" Ethan turned to look out at her, his gray eyes serious. "Because it brought me back to you, and that's the best thing that's happened to me in 10 years. Natalie's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, Natalie, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worth it." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything," Ethan said softly. "I just needed you to know." They sat there in silence, hands intertwined, as the sun dipped below the horizon. And for the first time in 10 years, Natalie allowed herself to hope. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She got up and padded downstairs, finding Ethan in the living room again, staring out the window. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. Ethan turned, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Seems to be a pattern with us." Natalie sat down beside him. "Ethan, I've been thinking." "About?" "About us," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what you said." Ethan's expression grew serious. And I'm scared," Natalie admitted. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. But I'm also scared of letting you go." Ethan reached out, cupping her face gently. "I won't hurt you, Natalie. Not again. I promise." Natalie leaned into his touch, her heart pounding. "How can you be so sure?" "Because losing you once was the worst mistake of my life," Ethan said, his voice rough. "And I'm not stupid enough to make it twice." Natalie's breath hitched, and before she could second-guess herself, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid to break the fragile moment. But then Ethan's hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened. 10 years of pain, regret, and longing poured into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Natalie rested her forehead against his. "This doesn't mean I've forgiven you," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said, his thumb brushing her cheek. "But it's a start." Natalie nodded, her heart full and aching all at once. It was a start, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning after the kiss, Natalie woke with a strange mix of emotions swirling in her chest. Relief, fear, anticipation. She'd kissed Ethan. After 10 years of anger and hurt, she'd kissed him, and it had felt right. Too right. She found him in the kitchen, making breakfast, pancakes from the smell of it. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a soft smile. "Morning," Natalie replied, her voice a little shy. They ate together, the silence comfortable but charged. Every time their eyes met, Natalie felt a flutter in her stomach. This was real. This was happening. But as the days passed, reality started to creep back in. The legal issue with the house was still unresolved, and Natalie's job at the high school was getting more demanding, leaving her exhausted by the end of each day. One evening, she came home to find Ethan on the phone, his voice tense. "I don't care what it takes, David. Find a way to expedite this. I'm not waiting months." Natalie's heart sank. He was still pushing to resolve the house situation, which meant this fragile thing between them might not last. When Ethan hung up, she confronted him. "You're still trying to get the house sorted out." "Of course I am," Ethan said, frowning. "Aren't you?" "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "Part of me wants it resolved, but another part." She trailed off, unable to finish. Ethan's expression softened. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Natalie, no matter what happens with the house, I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you want me to." But what if the courts decide it's yours? Natalie asked. What if I have to leave? Then I'll sign it over to you, Ethan said without hesitation. Natalie blinked. What? This house, Ethan said. If it comes down to it, I'll make sure you keep it. Because it's important to you. And you're important to me. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. Ethan, you can't do that. Why not? Ethan asked, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Because it's yours, too, Natalie said. You bought it. You have just as much right to it as I do. Ethan shook his head. The house doesn't matter, Natalie. You do. Natalie's breath hitched. She pulled him into a tight hug, burying her face in his chest. I don't deserve you, she whispered. You deserve everything, Ethan murmured into her hair. But even as they held each other, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would test them in ways they weren't ready for. A week later, the call came. Mr. Collins informed them that the legal team had reached a decision. They were to meet at the office the next morning. Natalie barely slept that night. Ethan held her, whispering reassurances, but she could feel the tension in his body too. When they arrived at the office, David and Mr. Collins were already there, along with a lawyer Natalie didn't recognize. Thank you for coming, the lawyer said. We've reviewed the case thoroughly, and we've reached a resolution. Natalie's heart pounded. Ethan's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. The court has determined, the lawyer continued, that due to the clerical error, both sales are void. The property will revert to the original owner, and both of you will receive full refunds. Natalie's stomach dropped. Wait, what? You're both being refunded, Mr. Collins explained. The house goes back on the market. You'll each have the option to rebid, but there's no guarantee either of you will get it. Natalie felt like the ground had been yanked out from under her. She looked at Ethan, seeing her own shock mirrored in his eyes. So we both lose the house? Ethan asked, his voice tight. Essentially, yes, the lawyer said, unless one of you outbids the other in the new sale. Natalie's chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment everything fell apart. Back at the house, they sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. What do we do? Natalie asked quietly. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. I don't know. Natalie looked around the living room. The house that had brought them back together was slipping through their fingers. Maybe we should both walk away, she said. Find different places. Start fresh. Ethan turned to her, his eyes intense. Is that what you want? Natalie's throat tightened. I don't know what I want anymore. Ethan stood, pacing the room. I know what I want. What? Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stopped, turning to face her. You. I want you, Natalie. The house doesn't matter. None of it matters if I don't have you. Natalie's breath caught. Ethan. I'm serious, Ethan said, stepping closer. Let someone else have the house. We'll find another one. Together. Natalie stared at him, her heart pounding. You'd do that? In a heartbeat, Ethan said. Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks. I don't want to lose this place, but I don't want to lose you either. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Then don't. We'll figure it out. Together. That night, they made a decision. Neither of them would bid on the house. Instead, they'd let it go and find something new, something that belonged to both of them from the start. It was terrifying, but it also felt right. The next morning, they called Mr. Collins and informed him of their decision. He sounded surprised, but didn't argue. Are you sure about this? He asked. We're sure, Natalie said, glancing at Ethan. He smiled, squeezing her hand. And just like that, the house on Maple Street was no longer theirs. But as they packed their things over the next few days, Natalie realized something. The house had never been the point. The point was finding each other again. And that was worth more than any property. Moving out of the house felt surreal. Natalie packed her boxes slowly, each item a reminder of the life she'd tried to build here. But strangely, she didn't feel sad. Not anymore. Because Ethan was right beside her, packing his own things, and they were doing it together. "Where do you want to go?" Ethan asked one evening as they sat surrounded by cardboard boxes. "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "Somewhere new. Somewhere that's ours." Ethan smiled. "I like the sound of that." Over the next week, they looked at apartments and houses together. Some were too big, some too small. But then they found it. A charming 2-story house on the edge of town, with a big backyard and a porch swing. "It's perfect," Natalie breathed, standing in the empty living room. "It is," Ethan agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They put in an offer that same day, and this time, there were no mistakes, no mix-ups. The house was theirs. As they moved in, Natalie felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a house. It was a home. Their home. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, Ethan turned to her. "I have something for you." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "What?" Ethan pulled out a small box from his pocket. Natalie's heart stopped. "Ethan, it's not what you think," Ethan said quickly, opening the box. Inside was a silver key. "A key?" Natalie asked, confused. "To this house," Ethan said. "I know we're both on the deed, but I wanted to give you this, as a symbol. This is your home, Natalie. Always." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, You don't have to say anything," Ethan said softly. "I just wanted you to know." Natalie took the key, her hand trembling. Then she leaned in, kissing him deeply. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I love you." Ethan's eyes widened. "What?" "I love you," Natalie repeated, her voice stronger now. "I've tried not to. I've tried to hold on to the anger and the hurt, but I can't anymore. I love you, Ethan. I always have." Ethan's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. "I love you too, Natalie. I never stopped." They kissed again, the porch swing swaying gently beneath them, and in that moment, everything felt right. A few months later, they hosted a housewarming party. Friends and family filled the new house, laughter and music echoing through the rooms. Maya pulled Natalie aside, grinning. "So, you and Ethan, huh? I have to admit, I didn't see that coming." Natalie laughed. "Neither did I." "But you're happy?" Maya asked. "I am," Natalie said, glancing across the room at Ethan. He was talking to some friends, his face relaxed and open in a way she'd never seen before. "I really am." Maya squeezed her hand. "You deserve this, Nat." "Thank you," Natalie said softly. As the party wound down and the last guests left, Natalie and Ethan collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but content. "That was a good night," Ethan said, pulling Natalie against him. "It was," Natalie agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ethan said, "Natalie, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Natalie tilted her head to look at him. "What?" Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out another small box. This time, Natalie's heart really did stop. "Ethan." Ethan opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I know we've only just found our way back to each other, and I know there's still so much we're figuring out, but I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you." Natalie's breath hitched, tears streaming down her face. "Natalie Carter," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. "Will you marry me?" Natalie didn't hesitate. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that made her toes curl. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Natalie whispered, "I can't believe this is real." "It is," Ethan said, resting his forehead against hers. "And I'm never letting you go again." Natalie smiled through her tears. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." They sat there on the couch, wrapped in each other's arms, as the night stretched on around them. And for the first time in 10 years, Natalie felt completely, utterly at peace. The house on Maple Street had brought them back together. But this house, their house, was where they'd build their future. Together. The months that followed were a whirlwind of wedding planning, late-night conversations, and quiet moments that felt like stolen treasures. Natalie threw herself into preparing for the life she'd once thought was impossible. Ethan was patient, supportive, and more present than she'd ever imagined he could be. But even in the midst of all the happiness, there were still shadows. One evening, as Natalie sat at the kitchen table addressing wedding invitations, she came across a name that made her pause. "Ethan, do you want to invite your father?" Ethan looked up from his laptop, his expression darkening. "No." "Are you sure?" Natalie asked gently. "I know things are complicated between you two, but I'm sure," Ethan said, his voice firm. "He doesn't deserve to be there." Natalie set down her pen, studying him. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, closing the laptop. "My father and I haven't spoken in 5 years. Not since I refused to take over his company the way he wanted me to." "What do you mean?" Natalie asked. "He wanted me to run the business his way," Ethan explained. "Ruthless, cold, no room for anything but profit. I told him I wanted to do things differently, that I wanted to build something that mattered, not just something that made money. He called me weak, said I was wasting my potential." Natalie's heart ached for him. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "It's fine," Ethan said, though his jaw was tight. "I made my choice, and I don't regret it." Natalie stood, walking over to him and wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You're not weak. You're one of the strongest people I know." Ethan leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the past pressing down on them. But together, it felt bearable. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the backyard of their new house. White flowers adorned the porch, string lights hung from the trees, and their closest friends and family gathered to witness their vows. Natalie wore a simple white dress that made her feel like a princess. Ethan wore a dark suit that made her heart skip a beat. As they stood beneath the archway, hands clasped, Natalie felt like she was in a dream. "Natalie," Ethan began, his voice steady but full of emotion. 10 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let you go because I was scared. Scared that I wasn't enough, that I couldn't give you the life you deserved. But you taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. And I promise you, Natalie, I will show up for you every single day for the rest of my life." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, when you walked back into my life, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen. But it turned out to be the best. You reminded me what it feels like to be loved, to be seen, to be cherished. And I promise you, I will spend every day showing you that you are enough, more than enough. You are everything." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan pulled Natalie into a kiss that felt like coming home. The reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Maya gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. Emily, Ethan's sister, welcomed Natalie into the family with open arms. And as the night wore on, Natalie and Ethan stole a moment alone on the porch. "Can you believe this is real?" Natalie asked, leaning against him. "Barely," Ethan admitted, wrapping his arms around her. "But I'm so glad it is." They stood there in the glow of the string lights, the sound of music and laughter drifting from inside the house. "I have something to tell you," Natalie said, her voice soft. Ethan pulled back to look at her. "What?" Natalie bit her lip, nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I've been thinking about the future, about us, and I think I'm ready to start a family." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really?" Natalie nodded. "If you are..." Ethan's face broke into the biggest smile. "I am. God, Natalie, I am." He kissed her again, this time slow and tender, full of promise. A year later, Natalie stood in the nursery of their home, rocking their newborn daughter in her arms. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, both of them staring down at the tiny miracle they'd created. "She's perfect," Ethan whispered. "She is," Natalie agreed, tears streaming down her face. Their daughter, Emma, had Ethan's gray eyes and Natalie's smile. She was the perfect blend of both of them. And as Natalie looked at her, she felt a sense of completeness she'd never known before. "We did it," Natalie said softly. "We built a life together." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "And it's just the beginning." Over the years that followed, their life continued to unfold in ways Natalie had never imagined. Ethan's company thrived, but he made sure to always put family first. Natalie continued teaching, finding joy in shaping young minds. Emma grew into a bright, curious little girl who loved books and ballet. And every night, after Emma was asleep, Natalie and Ethan would sit on the porch swing, talking about their day, their dreams, and the life they'd built together. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Natalie said, "Do you ever think about the house on Maple Street?" Ethan smiled. "Sometimes, but I don't regret letting it go." "Me neither," Natalie said, "because it brought us here." Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of love. "It brought us home." Natalie leaned into him, her heart full. They'd started with a mistake, a wrong house, a chance encounter, but they'd turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Natalie knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. With Ethan, with Emma, with the family they'd built together. This was home, and it always would be. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Emma started kindergarten, her backpack almost as big as she was. Natalie and Ethan celebrated their anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, too tired from parenting to go out, but too happy to care. Life was good, better than good. But as with any life, challenges arose. Ethan's company faced a major setback when a business deal fell through, leaving him stressed and distant. Natalie struggled to balance her teaching career with being a mother, feeling pulled in 1,000 directions. One night, they had their first real fight since getting married. "You're never here," Natalie said, her voice tight with frustration. "I know you're working hard, but Emma needs you. I need you." "I'm doing the best I can," Ethan shot back. "This deal could make or break the company, Natalie. I can't just walk away." "I'm not asking you to walk away," Natalie said. "I'm asking you to be present, to remember that we're a team." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "I am present. I'm here every night, aren't I?" "Physically, yes," Natalie said. "But mentally, emotionally, You're somewhere else." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He sank onto the couch, his shoulders slumping. "You're right. I'm sorry." Natalie sat beside him, taking his hand. "I know you're under a lot of pressure, but we'll get through this. We always do. Just don't shut me out." Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of regret. "I won't. I promise." They worked through it, like they always did. Ethan made an effort to be more present, to leave work at work and focus on his family when he was home. And Natalie learned to be more patient, to give him grace when things got tough. But the real test came a few months later. Natalie found out she was pregnant again. At first, she was thrilled. But as the weeks went by, complications arose. The doctors warned her that this pregnancy was high risk, that she'd need to take it easy. Ethan was beside himself with worry. He hired extra help for the house, insisted Natalie take time off from teaching, and barely left her side. "I'm fine," Natalie reassured him one evening as they sat together on the couch. "The doctors said as long as I rest, everything should be okay." "I know," Ethan said, but his voice was strained. "I just can't lose you, Natalie. I can't." Natalie cupped his face, making him look at her. "You won't. I'm not going anywhere." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The pregnancy was difficult. There were days when Natalie felt so weak she could barely get out of bed. But Ethan was there every step of the way, taking care of Emma, managing the house, and making sure Natalie had everything she needed. And then, on a cold November morning, their son was born. Natalie held him in her arms, tears streaming down her face as Ethan sat beside her, his own eyes red with emotion. "He's beautiful," Ethan whispered. "He is," Natalie agreed. They named him Michael, after Ethan's grandfather. And as Natalie looked at her family, her husband holding their newborn son, while their daughter peeked over the edge of the hospital bed, she felt a wave of gratitude so strong it took her breath away. "We're so lucky," she whispered. Ethan kissed her forehead. "We are." Life with 2 kids was chaotic. There were sleepless nights, tantrums, and moments when Natalie wondered how they'd survive. But there were also moments of pure joy. Emma teaching Michael to clap his hands, Ethan falling asleep on the couch with both kids curled up on his chest, family movie nights with popcorn and laughter. One evening, as Natalie tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up at her with big, curious eyes. "Mommy, do you and Daddy love each other?" Natalie smiled. "Of course we do, sweetheart. Very much." "But you fight sometimes," Emma said. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Emma's hair back. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other. Love isn't about never fighting. It's about always choosing each other, even when things are hard." Emma thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Natalie kissed her forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." As she left the room, she found Ethan standing in the hallway, a soft smile on his face. "You're a good mom," he said. "You're a good dad," Natalie replied. They walked downstairs together, hand in hand. And as they sat on the porch swing, the night air cool and still, Natalie leaned against Ethan, feeling more content than she ever had. "Do you remember the day we met again?" Natalie asked. "At the house on Maple Street?" "I remember," Ethan said. "I thought my life was over when I walked in and saw you there." Natalie laughed. "I thought the same thing, but it wasn't," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "It was just beginning." Natalie looked up at him, her eyes full of love. It was. They sat there in comfortable silence, the years stretching out before them. There would be more challenges, more fights, more sleepless nights. But there would also be more laughter, More love, more moments like this, and that was more than enough. 10 years after their wedding, Natalie and Ethan stood in the backyard of their home, watching as Emma, now 15, pushed Michael on the swing set. The house had grown with their family. They'd added a deck, a garden, and a treehouse that Ethan had built with his own hands. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Natalie asked, leaning against the deck railing. "Barely," Ethan admitted. "Feels like yesterday we were fighting over who owned the house on Maple Street." Natalie laughed. "That was the worst day of my life. And the best," Ethan added. Natalie smiled. "And the best." They'd faced so much together over the years. Health scares, financial struggles, the everyday chaos of raising 2 kids. But through it all, they'd never lost sight of each other. One evening, Natalie found an old box in the attic. Inside were the original mortgage papers from the house on Maple Street, along with photos from that time in her life. She brought the box downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table to go through it. Ethan found her there, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Nothing," Natalie said, wiping her eyes. I found these, and I realized how far we've come." Ethan looked at the papers, then at the photos. "We have come far, haven't we?" Natalie nodded. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked into that house, if the mistake had never been made." "I don't," Ethan said, "because I know we were meant to find each other again, one way or another." Natalie leaned into him, her heart full. "I love you. I love you too," Ethan said. As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. Emma went off to college, studying architecture, inspired by the homes her parents had built together. Michael followed in Ethan's footsteps, showing an early interest in business. And Natalie and Ethan, now empty nesters, rediscovered each other in new ways. They traveled, took up hobbies they'd never had time for, and spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing. One night, as they sat on the porch swing, now worn and creaky from years of use, Natalie said, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" Ethan asked. "Giving up the life you could have had, the one without me." Ethan turned to her, his eyes serious. "Natalie, you are the life I was meant to have. Everything else was just noise." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" Ethan smiled. "Years of practice." They laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet yard. On their 20th anniversary, Ethan surprised Natalie with a trip back to the town where the house on Maple Street stood. They drove past it, seeing that it had been renovated, a young family now living there. "Do you think they know the story?" Natalie asked. "Probably not," Ethan said. "But I hope they're as happy there as we were." Natalie smiled. "Me too." That night, they stayed at a small bed and breakfast nearby, and as they lay in bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Natalie felt a sense of peace that could only come from a life well lived. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For finding me again, for never giving up, for building this life with me." Ethan kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the way they'd been for 20 years. And when morning came, they woke to a new day, a new chapter, but the same love that had brought them together all those years ago. As they drove home, Natalie looked out the window, watching the world pass by. She thought about the girl she'd been, standing in that house on Maple Street, angry and hurt and scared. And she thought about the woman she'd become, loved and cherished and whole. "We did it," she said softly. "Did what?" Ethan asked. We built a life worth living. Ethan reached over, taking her hand. We did, and I wouldn't change a single thing. Natalie squeezed his hand, her heart full. Neither would I. And as they pulled into the driveway of their home, their real home, the one they'd built together from nothing but love and determination, Natalie knew that this was where she belonged. With Ethan, with their family, with the life they'd created. It had started with a mistake, but it had turned into the greatest love story she'd ever known. And that was all that mattered. Years continued to unfold, like pages in a book, each one filled with its own challenges and triumphs. Emma graduated from college and started her own architecture firm, designing sustainable homes for young families. Michael finished business school and joined Ethan's company, bringing fresh ideas and energy. Natalie retired from teaching, finally having time to write the novel she'd always dreamed of. And Ethan, now in his 60s, stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the company, choosing to spend more time with Natalie. They traveled the world, visiting places they'd only ever dreamed of. Paris, Tokyo, New Zealand. Each trip was an adventure, a chance to create new memories. But no matter where they went, they always came home to the house they'd built together. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, now replaced twice over the years, but still in the same spot, Natalie said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" Ethan asked. "About legacy, about what we're leaving behind." Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "And what do you think our legacy is?" Natalie smiled. "Love, family, the idea that it's never too late to start over, to forgive, to build something beautiful." Ethan nodded. "I like that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Natalie said, "I finished the novel." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really?" Natalie nodded. "It's about us, about the house on Maple Street, about second chances, about love that endures." "I can't wait to read it," Ethan said. The novel was published the following year. It became a bestseller, resonating with readers who saw their own struggles and triumphs reflected in Natalie's words. She did book tours, interviews, and signings. And through it all, Ethan was by her side, her biggest supporter. One evening, after a particularly successful book signing, they sat in their hotel room, exhausted but happy. "You did it," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "You told our story." Natalie smiled. "Our story was worth telling." Ethan kissed her, slow and tender. It still is. As they grew older, their love didn't diminish. If anything, it deepened. They knew each other's rhythms, their fears, their joys. They could communicate with just a look, a touch. They were two halves of a whole. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. Friends and family gathered in the backyard, the same place where they'd been married. There was laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches. Emma stood up, raising her glass. "To my parents, you taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about commitment, forgiveness, and showing up every single day. Thank you for being the best example I could have asked for." Michael followed. "Dad, you taught me that success isn't measured by money or power, but by the relationships we build. Mom, you taught me that it's never too late to chase your dreams. I'm grateful for both of you every single day." Natalie and Ethan held hands, tears streaming down their faces. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Natalie and Ethan found themselves alone on the porch swing once more. 30 years, Natalie said, shaking her head. "I can't believe it." "Best 30 years of my life," Ethan said. Natalie leaned into him. "Mine too." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. And in that moment, everything felt right. They'd built a life together, a family, a legacy. And it had all started with a mistake, a wrong house, a chance encounter. But it had turned into something beautiful, something lasting, something worth fighting for. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Natalie whispered, "I love you, Ethan Mercer." Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you too, Natalie Mercer. Always have, always will." And as they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that no matter what the future held, they'd face it together. Because that's what love was, showing up, day after day, year after year, choosing each other, over and over again. And they wouldn't have it any other way. The final years of Natalie and Ethan's life together were quiet, but full. They spent their days in the garden, reading on the porch, and watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Emma had 2 children of her own now, a boy and a girl. Michael had just welcomed his first daughter, and Natalie and Ethan, now great-grandparents, marveled at how quickly time had passed. One afternoon, as Natalie sat in her favorite chair by the window, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She'd been tired lately, more than usual. Ethan noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I'm fine," Natalie said, though her voice was weak. "Just tired." But as the weeks went by, the tiredness didn't go away. Natalie visited the doctor, and the news wasn't good. Her heart was failing. There wasn't much they could do. Ethan was devastated. He refused to accept it at first, demanding second opinions, researching treatments. But eventually, he had to face the truth. Natalie didn't have much time left. They spent her final months together, surrounded by family. Emma and Michael visited every day, bringing the grandchildren. Natalie told them stories, shared wisdom, and made sure they knew how much she loved them. And Ethan never left her side. One evening, as they sat together on the porch swing, Natalie said, "I'm not afraid." Ethan's voice broke. "I am." Natalie took his hand, squeezing gently. "Don't be. We've had a beautiful life, Ethan. More than I ever dreamed of." "I don't want to lose you," Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You won't," Natalie said. "I'll always be with you. In every sunset, every memory, every moment of love, I'll be there." Ethan buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing. Natalie held him, stroking his hair, whispering words of comfort. A few weeks later, Natalie passed away peacefully in her sleep, Ethan holding her hand. The funeral was held in the backyard, the same place where they'd been married, where they'd celebrated countless anniversaries. Friends and family gathered to say goodbye, sharing stories and tears. Ethan stood at the front, his voice steady despite the pain. "Natalie was the love of my life. She taught me what it means to be brave, to forgive, to love unconditionally, and I will carry her with me every single day for the rest of my life." In the months that followed, Ethan struggled. The house felt empty without her. The porch swing sat unused. The garden, once Natalie's pride and joy, began to wilt. But slowly, with the support of his children and grandchildren, Ethan began to heal. He started tending the garden again, planting Natalie's favorite flowers. He sat on the porch swing, remembering the countless evenings they'd spent there together. And he read Natalie's novel over and over, finding comfort in her words. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma sat beside him. "How are you doing, Dad?" Ethan smiled, though his eyes were sad. "I miss her every day, but I'm okay. She wouldn't want me to stop living." Emma took his hand. She'd be so proud of you. Ethan nodded. I hope so. And as the years passed, Ethan continued to live, honoring Natalie's memory in everything he did. He spent time with his family, traveled to places they'd always talked about visiting, and even started a foundation in Natalie's name to support young writers. And every evening, he sat on the porch swing, talking to Natalie as if she were still there, telling her about his day, about the grandchildren, about how much he missed her. On what would have been their 40th anniversary, Ethan sat on the swing, holding a copy of Natalie's novel. We did it, Nat, he whispered. We built a life worth living, and I'm so grateful I got to share it with you. He looked up at the sky, now painted in shades of pink and gold, and for a moment, he could have sworn he felt her presence beside him, warm, comforting, eternal. Ethan smiled through his tears. I love you, Natalie. Always have. Always will. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan knew that their love would endure, not just in the memories they'd created, but in the legacy they'd left behind. A legacy of love, forgiveness, and second chances. A legacy that would live on in their children, their grandchildren, and everyone whose lives they'd touched. It had started with a mistake, a wrong house, a chance encounter, but it had become the greatest love story Ethan had ever known. And that was all that mattered. So, what city are you watching from? And how would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Let us know in the comments below.